welcome to Bharata First. You're watching Big Picture with me, Pereira. And since you're here, please like the video, subscribe, and share the content as well so that more people get to know about Bharata First. In this edition of Big Picture, we will analyze Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi's visit to India. This in the backdrop of the border tensions between New Delhi and Beijing, also other outstanding issues. Joining me on the program today are Suresh Goel, former ambassador, Srikant Kondapalli, Center for Asian Studies, JNU, and Amrita, Jash, Manipal Academy of Higher Education. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of Big Picture. Professor, let me start the program with you first. When you look at this particular visit, it comes in the backdrop of several outstanding issues. And it was a sudden visit. I mean, it was a surprise visit first to Afghanistan, and then on the way, he decides to visit India as well. What is the purpose of this visit, do you think?
Well, the official purpose is to prepare for the BRICS meeting somewhere late this year in China. As the foreign minister and the state councillor, this has been the tradition for them to prepare for the BRICS meeting. The previous two BRICS meetings were held virtually, and Moscow and New Delhi were in charge of those. And for this, President Xi Jinping was not able to attend due to COVID or other domestic issues. So the primary function of this visit is to prepare for the BRICS meeting later this year. However, since we have had the Galwan incident in June 2020, 20 Indian soldiers were killed in that skirmish. And also the Chinese, after 8 months, declared 4 dead in that conflict. This is also one other. Dr. Jaishankar had mentioned clearly that it is an abnormal relation that they have at the moment because of the lack of peace and tranquility, and of course the full mobilization of the armed forces. So the second purpose is to also discuss about the normalization of relations, on which, of course, the Indian side stoutly rejected the Chinese proposals because there has not been any withdrawal of the armed forces by China, and an explanation on why this whole situation has evolved, despite the written agreements between the two sides since 1993, 96, 2005, and 2013 agreements. So there is the second aspect on the territorial dispute and the clashes that happened. The third, Wang Yi's visit had the element of obviously Ukrainian developments. The Chinese have been defending the Russian role here. The Russian embassy in China, they have put up a note saying that President Xi Jinping had in principle agreed to the Russian actions in Ukraine. And so it appears that there is a lot of Russian pressure on China to increase the public support, which is lacking for Russia, as 141 countries have opposed the Russian action in Ukraine. So in this light, the Chinese were trying to revive the united front by pushing the Russia, India, China trilateral and trying to rope in India into this without conceding to India anything related to the territorial dispute, which is a key problem, as the Indian side had mentioned, because of the skirmishes and because of the lack of complete progress on the disengagement and de-escalation in all friction points. There are at least 3 friction points that have not been resolved. And so this is a key issue. Without resolving this, the Chinese were trying to utilize the Russian pressure in order to normalize relations with India. And that, of course, the Indian side had rejected. So right. That is the third. Fourth is obviously the issues related to energy security, the Chinese were planning to conduct a civilizational dialogue conference for which they probably would have invited India in this round of discussions. Afghanistan also came up for discussions, as External Affairs Minister mentioned in the press briefing, because China had proposed a Himalayan Quad at the exclusion of India by including Pakistan, Afghanistan, Tajikistan, or in other formats, but excluding India in this. So while India had contributed one of the largest in this region by $3 billion investment, aid, etc., in Afghanistan, there is no credence to the Indian stance in Afghanistan. So I think the Afghan issue is also raised as a part of the discussions.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you so much, Professor, for sharing those valuable inputs about, the purpose of the visit, so to speak. Ambassador, let me come to you now. So how would you look at this visit, especially at a time when there is so much of tension between the two nations? And despite those tensions, the two nations cannot do without each other because of the trade, but that too continues to be a problem for the Indian side. So how would you look at this visit?
Thank you very, very much, Frank. I think Professor Kondapalli has already described the whole map of the issues and the terrain of the relations between India and China, including Ukraine, energy, Himalayan, etc. Let me now come to my own views on what possibly can be done and where are the pitfalls. First of all, my own experience of China extending over 4 decades, when I was in service and later on, has been that from early 1990s onwards, there have been periods when China respected India, China wanted to get along with India, China did everything to improve relations with India, including in the area of the border dispute by suggesting putting it on the way, on the margins and improving relations in areas where it mattered. I do feel that from about a decade ago onwards, India has come lower and lower in the priorities for China, in the sense that China has begun to develop other options in the region, and that is where Himalayan Quad comes. China will try to keep India out in Afghanistan. China will try to keep India out, or at least India on tenterhooks in South Asia by developing relations with wherever it can challenge Indian interests. So in that sense, India has become a country which China would like to do away with, but cannot. In that sense, the relationship has become fraught with more problems and more contentions. This is my starting point in answering to your question, Frank. And therefore, when I look at this visit, my curiosity really is, how could China even think about visiting India and trying to, if we have to go by the suggestion that they would like Prime Minister Modi to come for the BRICS summit, how could they even think of such a possibility with all those areas which have not been resolved in the border dispute, and where, despite every effort, 15 rounds of core commander level talks, nothing has happened? Why? Number two, 2020, in my view, was not simply a question of clashes or Chinese incursions into Galwan. I think Professor Kondapalli himself said that was basically the year, the time, when the whole structure that had been built in the relationship over more than 2 decades, 3 decades, came crumbling down. It was all built on the basis of trust between the two. And the trust was that we have arrived, we have signed several agreements, and therefore a status quo will be maintained till the problem is solved. China obviously didn't believe in it. Another thing I have found we have to talk to our enemies. We have to talk to everyone. But the point is that in international levels beyond the documents, you develop a certain level of faith and trust in each other. I'm not going to name the countries, but clearly there are countries where we know that even if there is not a written document, we know they will abide by what they have said. And there are countries where even if there are written documents, one cannot take it at the face value. China is one of those countries.
Absolutely.
Therefore, for China, we need to really know. I think that maybe BRICS is one part of it, but I think China has come with certain other agenda in mind. Maybe it is Central Asia, maybe it is Ukraine. To my mind, it may also be that China now having Russia being engaged in Ukraine. Maybe China finds an opportunity for it to promote its agenda in Indo-Pacific. As we developing those reinforcing military structures in those islands. So I think we need to understand what China wants, but given all that, we should not take them on the face value. We need to ring fence our own security interests and make sure that we do nothing which leads to this kind of a break in trust again.
Absolutely, absolutely. Amrita, Jash, let me come across to you now, and let's analyze what does this mean for, Sino-Indian ties, and the visit of the foreign minister. Does it put pressure at some level on India to try and reciprocate?
Thank you, Mr. Pereira, for the questions. Following up on both, as Professor Kondapalli and Ambassador Goel said, on that note, does that form a pressure point? In my opinion, it doesn't form a pressure point on India, because India has already expressed its position very staunchly. And that we are seeing as a trend since the Eastern Ladakh standoff took off, that since 2020, that India's tone towards Beijing has become harsher and harder, that it cannot be usual business. And to reiterate our foreign minister's stance, that it's not the normal ties. However, I would like to throw some light into why do we see this pattern? There's a pattern in Wang's visit to India at this point of time. If we go back to 2017, we had the Doklam standoff. That time also BRICS was happening, and Shaman visit, and we see China tried to tone down the conciliatory approach, and then we see it was successful. However, in 2022, the scenario is very different. So is China trying to read India on similar lines, that, if it hosts, and if India doesn't turn, if there's a no-show from India, then it's a loss of face from Chinese side. But the other end, that why Wang Yi's visit is, there's also an aspect which I would like to read as, that is China trying to read India's abstention in UN a similar behavior to that of China, that they can come to some page, or that seeing it as an alignment, which is not. It is just a mere coincidence given their own strategic choices. But is China reading it as an opportunity to mellow the ties? Because given the tensions that are beyond the borders, which has implications for both India and China. So maybe if we expand the envelope, this can also figure in the Chinese thought process. As I would like to read on it.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, Professor, coming back to you now and going back to a point that the ambassador was making, there have been several levels of talks between India and China as far as the border issue is concerned. So where does the Chinese side stand with regards to the border? Because they seem to be really dragging their feet as far as these border discussions are concerned. So what does that mean really from a larger scheme of things for Sino-Indian ties? Please unmute, Professor.
Thank you. I think that is a major stumbling block in the bilateral relations. Whenever there is a crisis in the bilateral relations, that is traced to the territorial dispute. So I think there is that issue becomes a crucial factor here. Of course, we know that there are differences on claims, counterclaims, and so on the dispute. And the first discussion took place in 1960, 3 times. And since 1981, there were about 36 years of discussions uninterruptedly, except during the Pokhran 2 tests in 1998. 98, 99, we did not discuss the territorial dispute because that's the Chinese were pushing through the 1172 resolution in the Security Council, criticizing the Indian nuclear program. So we have had nearly 36 years of discussions on the territorial dispute, and I'm sure both sides know where their land is or claimed land is. I'm sure the principles have been worked out. In the 2005 10 political parameters, they regarded the territorial dispute from 3 phases of resolution. And they claimed that after the special representative meetings were instituted, 2.5 phases were completed for this, and they are in the penultimate half phase of the LAC clarification, line of actual control clarification. However, since last 2-3 years, there has not been any meeting between the special representatives after the October 2019 discussion, partly because of COVID, but most important because of the Galwan incident. So we have not had any progress on the, no discussion, in fact, on this issue on the territorial aspects. So where is the problem here? The problem is that at least one country is not willing to resolve the problem. Previously, they suggested that India doesn't have a unified leadership, majority in the parliament, and so on. But since 2014, we have gone away from the coalition era, and we have a majority in the parliament for a single party. And so it is quite possible that the dispute can be resolved, at least from an Indian perspective. Of course, there are claimed and extended claim. For example, in some areas in Himachal, Uttaranchal, suddenly the Chinese started saying that there is a dispute here, while never before they mentioned about those areas. So suddenly these things also have upset the whole apple cart on the territorial dispute resolution. And then there is also the Pakistan role here. If India-China border dispute is resolved, obviously the all-weather friend will be problematic for China, because India would start mobilizing forces on only one front left. So this is a balancing action that China is trying to do on that count. So overall, the territorial dispute is a stumbling block in the bilateral relations, and China is unwilling to resolve this in any case. Or they have suggested, as Daipinko, the former special representative, suggested, Tawang should be given to China, which no Indian elected government would be able to accept. So we are again back to square one in this issue. Although India had not put conditions on Aksai Chin to be completely returned back to India. So in other words, there has been a practical, pragmatic response from India, but even that has not been considered. When we look at the Chauvelai's proposal in 59, they have also claimed up to Galwan, and the current crisis goes even beyond Galwan, a few 800 meters or so in this area. So in other words, this is a very intractable issue from a Chinese point of view.
Absolutely. Ambassador, coming back to you now, so from a diplomatic standpoint, considering where we are, considering, where the world is as well, with everything that's been happening with Ukraine, the kind of statements that the Biden administration has been making, how should India proceed really, from a diplomatic standpoint, dealing with China and, and the region as well?
That's a very difficult question, Frank, because to be able to define the stand or to define the position which India should take requires certain givens, certain definitiveness in terms of Chinese stand. The problem is that we do not find any definitiveness in what China says and does. There is a lot of shiftiness in the positions. Professor Kondapalli talked about the line of actual control, Galwan, the way the positions have changed. Even Taiwan, to begin with, they claim Taiwan, but Taiwan was not made out to be a major issue. It has become a major contention really in the recent years because of the Dalai Lama. It's supposed to be the place from where there will be a definitive input into who the next Dalai Lama should be, etc. All that is it's a separate part. But the point really here is that on the major issue between India and China, which is really the line of actual control and border. Incidentally, if we have two lines of actual control in East Ladakh, it's simply because China is not even prepared to exchange their maps of the LAC. So how do you fix an LAC if you can't even give the map of what you have in mind? It's simply because they want to leave the way open to be able to change it when they want to do it. Therefore, I think the most important point at this stage really is, given that you cannot trust China, given that the issue of the line LAC and the border is going to continue for a long time to come, given that in terms of trade and economic relationship, it is going to remain unbalanced one way, etc., for quite some time to come, at least till Indian economy is able to take care of it. My sense would be that we need to build up a kind of balancing environment in the region which is most important to us. And that is Indo-Pacific neighborhood, our eastern neighborhood, ASEAN, etc., etc. And their Quad is one instrument, one platform that can play an important role. I'm going to go a step beyond what Quad does at the moment. Quad, we have been very firm that Quad will not be a security organization. I think it is time that we think of developing a common security architecture in Indo-Pacific, which can assure us that while we are busy sorting out our problems in the continental boundaries, that we are not at risk in the maritime domain. So we need to build our security architecture. We need to reduce our trade dependence on China, which can be done by building supply chain linkages with other countries in the region. RCEP would have been very, very good, but we know China is there and China would have misused it really. But I think that is the way we have to go, build up sufficient architecture in the neighborhood, both trade and security, to ring fence our interests. Frank.
Absolutely. Amrita, just coming back to you now, as far as China is concerned, there are many occasions in the past as well where we've always given China the benefit of the doubt. But there is, trust deficit if you look at the relationship right now. So how big an issue is that really when we look at bilateral ties between the two countries?
Trust deficit is indeed the biggest stumbling block. Like if we go back to why the border dispute is not getting resolved, it's because of the differences in the perceptions that we had. And it's the breeding ground is the very aspect of trust or mistrust that we exhibit towards each other. And it's not just in the current phase, but it's very much historical in nature. And the 1962 is an outcome of that very trust that India vested on China, and you see the repercussions of that trust. So we go back to that historical, like the vantage of the history that matters. And today, like every time you have given China that benefit of doubt, you have not got any dividend out of it. And we need to understand there is no permanent friends or permanent enemies in relations. It's in international relations. It's permanent interest that should matter. So trust also swings based on your interest. So, and China is very much an exemplar to that, how it swings its trust. So more than trust, I think so. It's more of pragmatism that should be our rule book in matters vis-a-vis China, rather than all these fancy words. Like for instance, if Wang is the three key points out of Wang's visit, he said he emphasized on keeping the border dispute to an appropriate place. What is an appropriate place? Obviously, the appropriate place in interest of China. Second, he suggested that China doesn't want a unipolar Asia. So again, China is talking from a pedestal. Who is China to want whether it wants to see India in that Asia or not? India is independent of that. India is a civilizational state in itself. And then talking about that, we both should, then the moot point is again, that multilaterally we should engage. So if we see, it is the last point that makes more of a workable or becomes workable. And if we fix the dots, and in that he has actually announced it as an Asian moment. Why is it Asian moment? Because this year China is going to host BRICS, then following next year, India with SCO and G20. So it's just baggaged or say wrapped up in this multilateral framework that is doable for both sides, because there is interest which spills beyond that bilateral frame. So I feel that in case of China, we shouldn't just read in between the lines. We need to read and reread in between the lines, and it's time that we do that and have some specific changes to our own China policy. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right. It's time to get quick closing comments now with the best way forward and how do we proceed. Starting first with you, Professor Kondapalli. Unmute, please.
I think the best way forward is to insist on the progress in relation to Galwan, because we have both mobilized and they spent 2 winters in this mountainous terrain. So this is one issue, I think, moving forward. As Ambassador Goel mentioned, there is also the trade related that we need to reduce our dependence on China and increase our own manufacturing capabilities, etc. Third, I think, as External Affairs Minister mentioned, there are nearly 30,000 Indians who are studying in China on the medical related sciences, and visa problem has become a big issue. And so because they're all paying high tuition fee, and China had agreed for their academic and other, career-wise. So I think on that there should be some progress because of the practicals that are required, laboratory and clinical trials that are required for medical sciences. So that is, I think, the way forward at the moment.
Absolutely. Ambassador?
Frank, to use a phrase from your previous avatar, I think we need to look at the big picture of relation between India and China here. And in that big picture, I think the first and the most important element is for China to show respect for Indian sensitivities and Indian concerns, whether it is the economy or it is border, it is security, or the whole gamut of relations. Now, I don't think it is realistic to assume moving in the direction even within 1 year or 2 years. It takes time to develop that respect. So my suggestion would be that we develop the security architecture in maritime domain. In the meantime, ring fence our interests. I'm using the same word again, and keep talking to China to let them know, discuss the whole gamut of relations, and let them know that we are prepared to work together, but there has to be an agreed basis. China is always very fond of using the words agreed basis, common grounds, common things. So let us give it back to them. Please come back with the common basis. Let us see what is the agreed ground. We will work on that agreed ground. Let us agree on the ground first, and then we move on.
Absolutely. And Amrita, close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
That India and China need to be on the same page on the border. And here the starting point lies in not shelving the border dispute, but that should be the starting point of the discussion. And as China tries to, put a blind eye and treat the bilateral issue and border issues in two different parallels. So that at least from the Indian side, the pragmatism lies in talking to China from a position of strength and getting the LSE or the border problem on the talking table. Thank you.
All right, we'll have to leave it at that. Thank you so much to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's it from me. See you again next time.